talking to a friend of mine this week who's also a realtor, and she's got this client, and the client is in her, I think 70 something, kind of getting up there, and has a house in we'll just say Western King County, and it's got equity. And she's thinking about moving. She wants to be closer to her church, so it's kind of a flip-flop about a couple different places, but she's not doing anything. She's not pulling the trigger. She's not making the move. And my realtor friend has been working with her for a while now, and she's getting kind of frustrated, kind of pissed. I mean, we've all been there. We get it. And so I saw this friend of mine a couple days ago, and I was like, well, what's the deal? What's going on? Why is she sitting on the fence? And she says, well, her son, the doctor, says that next year the economy is going to blow up, so she should just stay where she is. Okay, so that's just a story from the street, but it's a story a lot of you have heard. There's a lot of uncertainty. People are like, what the hell? We don't know what's going on. And then there's just all the political stuff, right? So it's a pretty interesting time. And I just thought, we should talk about this. And before I decided to pick this topic, I said to myself, okay, be brave, because if we talk about politics, 50% of the people are going to be pissed, 50% are going to be happy. It's just how it goes. And so that's why I said in the email this morning, I'd like everybody to participate. But, if people say something you don't agree with, just deal with it. It's just the way the world is right now. And I want this to be a place for, I'll just use the two words, spirited discussion. And what's kind of ironic about those two words together is that if we go back to those guys called our founding fathers, that was not an accident. That this was one of the basic ideas that was used to found this thing called democracy that we're all living in, is the idea that we come together and we have our differences and we express them however we express them, and that's kind of a good thing given human society to this point. And then and then we take care of the rest of it. We vote and decide and everything that we do. But what I think is just one among us is that we've really gotten away from having, a room, a pub, a street corner, a public square, a place, and someone who says, hey, we should talk about this. And I want to be very precise in my choice of words here. Talk about this, but not in a gotcha kind of way. Okay, so I watched a couple little news things this morning when I was at the gym on the bike, and I tend to flip-flop with my media because it's so partisan. And, I just everybody's in a silo. And I was telling this friend of mine a couple days ago, I said, the news media that I tend to find myself consuming more now is the BBC. And just seeing how the rest of the world is looking at all of our tomfooleriness and shenanigans and so forth. It's pretty interesting. And half my family's from the UK, so there is that. I just, I want to have this talk. And I was watching these people this morning, and I thought, it's just become such an offense-defense. And they're using, in my view, policy issues as fodder instead of really kind of going, was this good for the folks? Or all my questions as a media person to you as a decision maker, policy maker, just in the realm of gotcha. And I'm sad to report today in America that most of it was in the second camp and not the first. People were not there to say, well, what's better for the folks? It's kind of like, let's impeach the people that decide, and let me see if I can get away with that today and win a Pulitzer. That's kind of what it's become. And I'm sad to report that, but that's where we are. So I'd like to have a different kind of conversation, one that's based a little bit more in facts, and see where we go and see what you guys think. I'm not trying to change any minds, not trying to push any agenda. I know people come to this thing from different beliefs, which is kind of why I want to do it, so we can hear what everybody has to say. what I enjoy about the tax stuff is the policy stuff. To me, that's the fascinating part. And so in 2017, during the first Trump administration, there was a moment in his presidency, and we were about a year and a half into it, where the big push was, well, we got to get something done. And that was kind of sad because that's just, a Hail Mary. And what they pushed through the Congress was this Taxpayer Relief Act, or whatever it was called in 2017. And I remember doing the math at the time because, this is Desert Pencil, and I am the Desert Pencil guy. So I did the math, and here to report, mathematically, that tax rates for upper income people did drop in 2017 as opposed to the previous tax rates, especially in the upper tiers, the upper, say, 3 different brackets. That's a factual truth. It's not incorrect, okay? That has been the law since 2017, okay? But that law, as many laws are when they're written, and that was written for, I believe, an 8-year cycle, many laws that are written with what's called sunsets on them. So a sunset basically is an expiration. And I would say, as a matter of policy, that that's not a bad idea. And the reason it's not a bad idea is because the world as you know it today is probably going to be a hell of a lot different 8 years from now. So a sunset provision allows policymakers in real time in the future to reassess a situation and say, should we keep going or should we change? Okay. I learned a long time ago that it is impossible, literally, to have a cogent discussion about taxation without bumping up against politics. I mean, they're just commingled. It's incestuous. You're not going to undo it. It is what it is. And if you're a historian, come on, it's part of how the country was formed, taxation without representation, the Boston Tea Party, all that stuff. So it's been a political topic for a long time. Today, what you hear on the media, when a media person puts a microphone in front of a person on the left, because I'm just going to call it what it is, we've heard it over and over and over and over, tax cuts for the rich. Okay, that's the talking point. Okay, so I want to just kind of pause there and lay a couple of thoughts on the table, and then I want to hear what you guys have to say about this one topic. Okay, so tax cuts for the rich sounds good. I mean, it does. It's a good talking point if you're in opposition to the party in power. I mean, it makes sense. I get it. The question is it true? Okay. And I think a sub-question is it morally right or wrong? Then that to me is the interesting question, and here's why. Because if you are in a moment in history when you're one of the Trump is the devil people, and there's a lot of them out there, I'm just going to call it what it is, I do not sugarcoat, I'm too old, then that you're going to buy into that, okay? And the association one makes is that wealthy people are not paying something called a fair share. Okay, we've all heard from politicians for a long time. So is that okay or is that not okay? In other words, is this an economy and a republic and a democracy that should promote or penalize success? Because that's what we're saying. Okay. Now there's 2 camps on that idea, and I'll pause after this. One camp is obviously, no, you shouldn't penalize it, okay? And so it's a yes, no, it's a binary question. We get that, all right? You work hard, you make a lot of money, you sacrifice, you do what you're supposed to do in America, you get an education, all the things, you should be rewarded. You should get more cookies, okay? That's one argument, okay? And it makes sense. However, there is another argument in the macro, and that argument is an argument against class disparity, okay, against ruling aristocracies, against, to use a Stalinistic term, the bourgeoisie and the proletariat, okay, to make it more even for everybody, okay? Now, if you think about it, if you study societies and history, it's only been about, you know, a few hundred years and even 80 years that, or 100 years, that we've been able to contrast societies and do a one versus the other when we talk about republics and democracies versus a more communistic or a more socialistic approach. Okay, those are relatively new phenomena. You know, the first coin was mined in Asia Minor, down by Greece, you know, a long time ago, several thousand years ago. But it's taken this long for societies to evolve to a point where we have this new problem of class disparity. And so the argument in favor of taxing higher wealth or higher income people is to level out class disparity. Okay? Whether you agree with the argument or not, I'm just saying that's the argument. And there are other mechanisms that have been put in place historically in tax policy to do that as well. One is called the alternative minimum tax, the AMT, which I've been subject to for probably on and off the last 20 years of my life. If you don't know what the AMT is, when you're subject to the AMT, you do your taxes two ways. You do them with all the deductions, and then you do them without, and you pay the higher tax. Okay? So the AMT was introduced in the 60s, and it was designed again to prevent, you know, a disparity of wealth, aristocracies, and that kind of thing. I read an article once that when the AMT started, there were about 100 families that were subject to it, and now it's tens of thousands of people that are subject to it because the code has evolved and we have all these different deductions. Okay, so that's that thing. The other thing that has been installed in American tax policy to quash class disparity is the estate tax. Okay, now ironically, what's happened in all of our lifetimes is that the exclusion limit on the estate tax has risen. And now at the federal level, you don't have to pay estate tax until your estate's like, I think, $13 million or something like that. So a lot of people don't have to pay it. Most people don't. The interesting part of that sub-conversation is that I believe it's 13 of the 50 states have something called a pickup tax, which is an estate tax that you pay at the state level, and that's due before the federal. Because if you pay it, it becomes a deduction on your federal. In Washington state, the exclusion's only like $2.2 million. So if your state is over that amount, you're writing the state of Washington a check for your estate tax. Okay. All right, I'm going to stop there. That's a lot of stuff that I just covered. But the kind of the capstone is there has been no change in the tax rates or policy as a result of the new big beautiful bill. What it did was it just eliminated the sunset of what is currently existing, which compared to prior to 2017 is more tax beneficial to higher income earning people. That part is true. Okay, so that's how we start. Kim, what do you think?
You know, what comes to mind is like within the last year, I read a book called The Secret of Finnish Happiness. It was so fascinating to compare.
Let me just pause you there. That's Finnish, as in the Norwegian country. Okay, gotcha.
Yeah, and they have the highest happiness quotient on the planet.
Yep.
And the women, it's a fascinating book because the woman writing it was moving from New Zealand to the darkest, coldest country. You know, it's like dark all winter long. And this is where they put the babies outside in strollers to sleep in the cold, wrapped up in bundles to toughen them up. And this country's been invaded by the Nazis and all of that. And the people pulled together. They have this history of like when the Nazis were there, people turned in their gold jewelry and stuff to help fund the war effort to try to keep the Nazis out. So anyway, they have like 2,000 people in the whole country that are homeless. That's it, because it's a socialist country. And part of their culture is it's a privilege to pay taxes. People brag about how much taxes they pay. It's a privilege. It's just like such a different concept to how our country is. And it was so fascinating. It just really brought into clarity how completely different mindset
Let me draw just a couple quick differences because the other half of my family is from Scandinavia. They're from Denmark. Okay. So that whole tier of the world, Finland, Sweden, Denmark, all those folks, they're socialist people. And every year when they do, whoever, the International World Happiness Organization, whoever they're called, whenever they do that survey, it's always Scandinavian countries that win. And their tax rate on average, and I mean, you can fact check me, it's like 50% basically is what it is. But there's a couple of important contrasts there that I also just want to put into the discussion. One of them is this. They're not just happy because they're paying all this money to the government. Okay, that's not true. They're happy because they're getting a ton of services from the government in exchange for their taxes. Okay, so here's what our leaders have done. They have driven our economy to a point where now our tax revenue is about 50 cents on the dollar just to pay interest on all the money we've borrowed. Okay, that's where America is currently. Second point is this, and I just looked this up. The population of Finland is about 5.5 million people. The population of the United States is about 340 million. So it sounds good on paper. I don't know that America has the ability to administer that much happiness to its citizens. Okay, I'm just talking about strategy.
Yeah.
So,
No,
no, that's good. No, I think it's a great point. I'm glad you brought it up. So I'm going to keep this moving along. Chris Callan, what do you think about what Kim had to say? Do you want to pay more taxes and be happier, man?
There's a lot of different ways to make that sandwich, right? I guess I'm probably more of rooted in reality to some degree. I guess I just start from like what's realistic and possible. I don't think we're going to look like Finland anytime soon. Um, yeah, I mean, I think that we as a country spend money in a lot of ways that maybe made sense at one point in time, but don't make a lot of sense today. There's no doubt that we need to rein in our spending habits domestically and internationally. I don't know that we need to be the police for the world and push our sort of cultural agenda and our philosophies to the extent and expense that we do. Um, and I think, we've sort of spent ourselves into a place at this point that we probably need to make some really tough decisions as a country and as a population, some of which are going to be like really uncomfortable and maybe fly in the face of our uh, principles and preferences.
That's a really good. I'm going to pause you there just for a second. That's an excellent point you just made. And let's just look in the last few months at how society at large has responded when government has said, we're going to change some things. And I'm talking about Doge, right? People just freaked out. So nobody likes to have their thing taken away. So I'm not going to do a big sermon on tariffs, but I do want to point out a couple things about tariffs that I think are important for us to all understand. Tariffs are a form of taxation imposed by governments. They are. Okay? And my view as a free marketer, primarily, is that with government intervention, it's always a question of how much is enough, how much is too little, how much is just right. It's kind of a Goldilocks syndrome. But in my little world, which is consumed a lot with cameras and things like that, I've already seen price increases. Now, these are not, in hard dollars, huge amounts, but as a percentage of purchase price, 10 to 25% already slapped on. And you can hear a lot of gobbledygook from whatever politician you choose to listen to. But basically what happens is consumers pay more and the government receives the money. Well, if I just do a straight line between the two, that's a tax. And so I've heard it's too early to tell, but I've heard two possible ways to deploy this extra revenue the government's getting, which is going to be about $380 billion this morning. I listened to Scott Bessent this morning, the Secretary of the Treasury. They can use it to knock down the debt, which would be my vote, as you know, or they can redistribute it to the citizens. And I'm pretty sure that if they do, that'll become another marketing ploy for the current occupant of the Oval Office. Okay, which to me is like, well, why did we have to pay in the first place then, man? If you're just going to give it all back, that seems kind of dumb, you know? But tariffs are here. They're not going away. Historically, once a tariff is imposed, it's not removed, historically, generally speaking, okay? So this is a thing that we're all going to have to live with for a long time, and eventually the markets, well, the economy will adjust. Stock market doesn't seem to care about it so much. And there's little outliers that we hear in the news, you know, the sugar high of the day. This week it's Brazil is going to get taxed 50%. India's going to get taxed 80% because they're buying gas from Russia. There's going to be all those little things. But right now, the average rate is about 17%. That's where it seems to be settling in, between 17 and about 25. But again, economically for all of us folks, we're going to pay more for the same stuff. It's inflation, and inflation is a form of taxation imposed by governments. It just is what it is. So let me real quick go back to, because this is a really important thing, the deficit and the debt. And I'll be very brief in this, okay? Because I need to say this because it's important to me. People get this wrong all the time. The deficit and the debt are two different things, okay? They are not the same, but they're related. So here's how it works. And I'm just going to use the word about because I don't have the numbers in front of me. Just bear with me. So every year, the Department of Treasury, the Internal Revenue Service, brings in about $4.5 trillion, okay? And the government spends about $6 trillion, okay? And that's gone on since, I believe it was the second year of the first Clinton presidency term when he announced the State of the Union that we have no deficit this year. Ever since then, the United States has engaged in what's called deficit spending, which just means that the government spends more than they make, okay? So we sit here and we go, well, how the hell can you do that? Well, the way you can do that is the currency is sovereign, and it's also what's known as the world's reserve currency and has been since 1945. So the United States is in a very unique position to be able to continue to incur and accrue debt because of this dollar being the world's reserve currency. So what happens is the government closes its books. I believe their fiscal year is September 1st to August 31st. I think I'm right about that. So anyway, what happens is when they close their books, they go, oh, we have $1.5 million in deficit. So what they do in the books is they take that number and they add it to the debt. Okay, so the deficit is like your checkbook and the debt is like your balance sheet. Okay, so that debt has to be paid, interest on the debt. We hear that all the time. So that debt keeps going up every year, and that's why as the government pays its bills, the amount of interest paid on the debt that comes out of every tax dollar received has gone up so much because our debt has continued to increase every year. And I used to live in the city. I lived up on top of Capitol Hill, and I lived at Green Lake. I lived in West Seattle. And that was most of the 90s, which were my 30s. And lots of changes and all that kind of thing. So I went to the AI this morning. This is not the paid chat GPT. I just went to the Microsoft one, where I think it's called Copilot. And I just typed in, what are the future of Seattle real estate prices? Or what is the future of Seattle real estate prices? That's all I wrote. And it was interesting what came up. So what it said was, right now, there's a net out-migration citizens of the city of Seattle, and they're going to Bellingham and Portland. Now, why they're going to Portland, I have no idea, but that's just what the thing said. And then I said, what's the anticipated future appreciation of homes in Seattle? And the AI said about 1.5% per year. Okay. So let's just pause there for a second, okay? I don't think AI is political. I could be wrong. But, that's what the AI is saying. And if we go back to before the COVID time, it was a pretty common talking point that your house will appreciate at about 3% per year, okay? So if I'm a seller and I'm sitting on, let's just say $1 million in equity, just pick a number, easy. Because right now the median price in Seattle is $935. If I could take that money and put it in a bond earning 6%, I'm making $60,000 a year instead of $12,000 on market appreciation. Okay, that's a big difference of cash money in my pocket. And if I can take that money and rent for less than $5,000 a month, which I still can, I'm financially a lot better off than sitting on that equity and not having to do anything. Does that make sense? Okay, so
That's not what your mortgage payment is, I think.
Well, if you're going to rebuy, but if
No,
you're
but
downsizing, you want to just rent,
You're gonna rent some room, okay.
I'm not saying a room. You can rent a decent apartment around for $2,000 or $4,000. That's not hard to do.
I just had this conversation yesterday on the phone with a client who, it's her aunt's house who's buying into assisted living now, and she knows about her the journey. And I've been trying to get her to sell this house that's just sitting there forever, and she just wants to rent it. She's worried about, the values. She wants to get all the value out of it. I might follow back up today and tell her what you just said, because that's brilliant. And I keep warning her against renting it because she's in Tennessee and she doesn't know who these renters are going to be and whether they destroy the house and whether they'll pay rent, whether they'll ever leave, and she wants them to. And it's like, it's a hot mess. And, you're right. If she just sold the house and reinvested the money, she'll make way more than sitting on it. Even if we get 4% here in Kitsap County, she's still going to make way more.
Yeah, right now in the bond markets, and bonds are pretty safe, you can earn 6% pretty easily. Okay, well, that's 4 times more. That's a 4x return versus what the AI says you're going to get on appreciation in real estate in Seattle homes right now. Now, you don't have to agree with me, and I'm not saying don't buy houses. What I'm saying is there's ways that we can be in discussions with people who are just making their decisions based on wishy-washy feelings, partisan media, and they don't have someone who can sit down with them and say, look, I'm going to be very agnostic about this, okay? Here's a piece of data. Here's a piece of data, okay? 6 is bigger than 1.5. What do you think? Okay? I mean, I'm not going to get into how you sell people stuff today. That's not my point. But my point is, and I'm glad you brought this up, Kelly, is that we are so inundated right now as a society by this media, and I'll say again, by these goddamn things, that's all we know to be true. And so few of us, I guess, are skeptics like me, and I go, well, that doesn't make any sense. I'm going to check that out. So I do.
So what do we do, Joe? How do we
What do we do,
put this
Joe?
into a way?
Come on, Joe, play God for me, please.
Play God for me, Joe.
Yeah.
How do we do this? How do we make our businesses better? How do we keep our world safe? How do we? And I do like.
Okay, no, I got you. It's a good question. You're a smart woman. You may not like my answer, but this is what I'm going to say. It's a couple things. First of all, we hear our government use a term, it's called be vigilant. We hear that used in a variety of applications, okay? I'm going to borrow that term and say we need to be vigilant, and I'll translate that into we need to be skeptical. One of my mantras is prove it. I live a lot of my life by that, and I think it's ever important in today's world because there are so many people with a microphone that just fill us full of just stupid shit that is not true. Okay, prove it. If you can prove it, you win my heart and maybe my money. And that, to me, is the biggest problem with our leaders today, is they just say stuff, and, and I said this morning, if you say something enough times, eventually people believe it. And that's dangerous for all of us, Okay. So I think number one is be a little bit skeptical, be vigilant. Okay. Number two, spend a little bit of time learning about the world around you. Okay. Now I have a couple very dear friends, like, I don't watch the news. I can't do it. Okay. And I get it. You know, I don't watch the news a lot, at least sometimes. I watched the news with my roommates last week, and they're about 15 years older than me. And I watched the evening news, the Cairo evening news. I mean, that's just a staple of life in Seattle. And I counted, I swear to God, the first 6 stories on the evening news, the 5 or 6 o'clock news, murder, 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 murder. 6 first stories, okay? 7th story, City of Seattle is suing the Trump administration for $275 million for DEI money, okay? So we are only as intelligent as what we know. So I encourage everybody, take some time to learn about the world around you. I mean, to me, you guys are the superstars of the society because you show up here and you listen to my BS, but you're taking time to get an education about something that you don't know about. I mean, it's vital. It's so important. Okay? And my third piece of advice is this, and you can take it for what you want, okay? Things are going to be okay. I find myself saying that a lot. Okay? And I'm 63. One of the things I've learned in my life is that there's a lot of people that spend a lot of time doing what I call future tripping. Okay? They're worried about the future. Kelly's clients who won't do anything, worried about the future. My friend's 70-ish client doesn't want to sell, worried about the future. That's future tripping. Now, I'm not saying be in denial. What I'm saying is if we stop any of our lives and have an honest moment, most of the time we realize this. Things never ended up being as bad as we thought they would be. Think about that in your own life. A moment where you were like super freaked out about something. I mean, really, it was consuming you. And then it happened. You went, oh, it wasn't that bad. It happens all the time. We forget that. Okay. Now, I'm not saying ignore your instincts or your emotions and just be, Spock. I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is don't get sucked into, the media du jour. Because it's all gotcha. And that's sad to me. Okay. Hope that helps, Jen. I'm trying to save the world one resident at a time.